Mr. Smith and
Sure,
Mr.
and that
Daly.
might help my colleague as to where it is on the schedule. Could you point that out first?
Well, let me just say this. The list was composed of the individuals sitting at the end of the table that are the experts that have actually been participating in building this legislation. I hope that you would at least know which firearms are on that list or what firearms are not on the list. And the question is to Mr. Smith and Mr. Daly.
I would remind everyone that the list that is in G4 that we've made public, of course, has not yet been moved, and it may change at some point. But given that it's at least 480 pages, we might give the witnesses some time to.
I know. As a person that got the list just recently, I wasn't involved in the compiling of that list. I've been through it several times in the last 7 days, so I would just suggest that this should be a fairly straightforward answer.
The Benelli R1 rifle is not listed in either Schedule 1 or Schedule 2.
Okay, I can't hear. I don't know if there's any sound.
Do I need to repeat, sir?
Okay, that's fine.
Sir, if you could repeat your answer.
Yeah.
The member couldn't hear you.
Okay. The Benelli R1 rifle is not listed in either Schedule 1 or Schedule 2.
Okay, let's go to the next example. The Remington Model 742 Woodmaster hunting rifle. Is this on the list to be prohibited?
Mr. Zimmer?
No point of order, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was going to say props.
I'm just trying to help our witnesses more quickly recall which firearms are on the list.
Minister can.
Point of order,
Mr.
Mr. Chair. A prop is a prop, Mr. Chair.
I didn't
and I
quite hear
believe
the
props are
question.
not permitted.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. Yeah, so the standing orders against use of props pertains in the committee room. So I really would ask you to.
It's an image of one of the firearms listed on the prohibited on the amendment. So my hope is that it would help and aid our witnesses. But I'll go on. I'll just read off the actual model. The Remington Model 742 Woodmaster hunting rifle, is that prohibited on the list?
Again, I think it would be helpful to point out which paragraph on the list it is at and whether it's on the 1 to 96, which already prohibits or which just codifies previously prohibited firearms,
Sorry,
or
the
if
question
it's on
isn't,
the
sorry,
new
with respect,
400.
the question is to
Thank you.
Mr. Smith and Mr. Daly. And if I would ask that they answer these questions. You were here last meeting, and you frankly weren't able to answer most of my questions.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
That's why they're here. So that's why I'm
Mr. Van
directing
Bynen
my
on point of order.
questions to the witnesses that can answer my questions.
Mr. Van Bynen on a point of order.
It wasn't my point of order, but I'll turn it over to Talib. I think it was his point of order.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Sarai on his point. On somebody's point of order. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it would behoove us all if we could perhaps not harass the witnesses that are trying to be helpful. And I think this the tone. If we just make a comment on the tone in respect of the witnesses who are here giving us their time.
Thank you, Mr. Nur Mohammed. Mr. Zimmer, go ahead. You may ask specifically of the witnesses whom you want to ask the questions of. Ultimately, it's the chair's prerogative to recognize speaking or not. But I understand that
My hope, Mr. Chair, and I respect you for that.
Please don't interrupt me, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
I would certainly understand that you would like the Canadian Firearm Program to answer these particular questions. So
thank you.
Go ahead. Did you need to re-ask your
question? I can ask it again, Mr. Smith. Is the Remington Model 742 Woodmaster hunting rifle prohibited and on this list?
That particular rifle does not appear on either Schedule 1 or Schedule 2.
Okay. Next one.
Actually, Mr. Zimmer, I wonder when you say this list whether you might specify, because there is the existing schedules out there, and then there is the proposed list of that may or may not be introduced later with G46.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. What I'm referring to is legislation C21 that's before us today and the amendments that are also before us. So that's where my questions are coming from, and that's where they're sourced from as well. So I'll continue on. Is the auto ordinance M1 carbine hunting rifle, will it be prohibited as according to this amendment?
I believe that is on the list, but I would have to check to be entirely sure. It should
Please
be
check.
in the M1 carbine section.
I can assure you they're on the list. I'm just asking you to confirm it.
Yeah, so
It would be helpful if a member of the committee could provide and pinpoint the location of the specific make and model that he is asking about. That would better facilitate our ability to answer your question
And I
if you have that
appreciate,
information.
I appreciate
with-
your thoughts on how I should ask my questions. But I am asking my questions the way I have, I guess, organized them. And I'm asking them of our firearms experts, as again, I'm looking for answers as opposed to not knowing the answer. So that's why I'm asking Mr. Smith and Mr. Daly my questions.
I think it's a fair point that if you know where it is in the list, you could help them to.
It's a fair
pick-
point,
yeah.
but it is in the amendment and it is in the legislation. So, if I can, I know I've researched this document extensively in the last week. And again, my assumption would have been that the experts, and I assume that they have, would know what firearms are on the list or aren't on the list.
I'd just like to add to my colleague's point that there are numerous firearms on the list. There are about 400 pages, from what I understand.
Mr.
So
Smith?
absolutely would be very helpful for us to point out. So we can facilitate the answers today for you.
Sorry, my questions to Mr. Smith and Mr. Daly.
the firearm you mentioned, I believe, is the auto ordnance M1 carbine, and that appears on the list of Schedule 2 at paragraph 81, subparagraph F.
Good. Yes, I knew that as well. So next question, is the Browning Rifle Bar Mark III hunting rifle, is it on the list to be prohibited?
It's, that particular rifle is not on either list, Schedule 1 or Schedule 2.
Right now, but will it be?
As a part of the amendment, maybe I should ask it more clearly. As Amendment G46 lays out, will it be on that prohibited list if G46 were to pass? On the prohibited list.
What is or is not on the list is a matter of policy, and I'm not in a position to address.
You're
what
not in a
the
position
government
to
chooses to
address
put on the
what's
list.
on the list of G46, the amendment that was put before us?
So I would remind Mr. Zimmer that that motion is not moved yet. The list is provided
it's
for public
public.
information, for
Yeah.
discussion, but it's not, we don't know if it's going to pass or how it might change. So you just bear that in mind.
Yeah. I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate that. I just know that for you're appearing today to answer questions based on C21 and possible proposed amendments to C21. That's how I'm basing my questions, and that's why you're here today to answer those questions. And it seems pretty clear to have a knowledge of what's on that amendment would have been it's a public document, it's out there, that you would have a good knowledge of that document. And I would say I will let you know that the Browning Rifle Bar Mark III hunting rifle is on the list. So I'll ask you this question. Will the Browning Rifle Bar Mark III safari hunting rifle, will it be prohibited if this amendment passes?
I don't recall seeing the bar on the list. Perhaps you could point out to where you're seeing it. I would also point out that there are two kinds of bars. There's the bar sporting rifle made by Browning, and there's the bar machine gun from World War I era. So perhaps there's some confusion there as well.
Well, maybe the confusion, maybe let's clarify. The amendment before us, too, is also G4. And are you familiar with the G4 amendment?
That's the one that speaks to centerfire semi-automatic rifles.
Yes, a firearm that is a rifle or shotgun that is capable of discharging centerfire ammunition in a semi-automatic manner and that is designed to accept a detachable cartridge magazine with a capacity greater than 5 cartridges of the type for which the firearm was originally designed. So I'm asking about G4, and that's a very all-inclusive amendment, just that paragraph alone. It's open-ended, could really add any firearm in the future, and that's what we're looking for the interpretation today, right? Is it on the list? Because, we're looking for a definitive answer from you, Mr. Smith or Mr. Daly, about are these going to be captured in this new list of prohibited hunting rifle bans that the Prime Minister has laid before us?
The schedules 1 and Schedule 2, are not connected in any way to the proposed amendment you were referring to earlier about centerfire semi-automatic rifles. They operate completely independently. So the firearms that are listed on Schedule 1 are the firearms which are already prohibited, either in the 1990s or in 2020.
Yep.
On Schedule 2, it's firearms that the government has proposed become prohibited if the bill passes. And those lists are curated. They are produced manually. And there's the...
So you're saying no, kind of what you're leading people to believe, and maybe I shouldn't say that. I'll have you answer the question. Some of the firearms I've already spoken about fall into that G4 category in that paragraph, to be potentially prohibited if this legislation passes under C21. And you're saying, are you saying that they're not going to be impacted by this legislation, or are you saying that they are going to be impacted by the legislation?
I'm saying neither. What I said was, in your response to the question were they on the list, I answered whether they were on the list or not. The impact of the evergreening clause, the semi-automatic centerfire clause that you mentioned earlier, was not part of the question and not part of the answer either. Okay.
Well, let's keep going, because I think we're looking for clear answers today, and we're still not getting them. I think law-abiding firearms owners know that they're going to be included by that paragraph. And for you to kind of say, well, no.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, point of order.
Mr. Van Bynen, point of order, please.
Statements made by the member are speculative. The amendments or any changes that might be contemplated for that schedule have not been dealt with, as been mentioned earlier. So it's an inappropriate comment.
Thank you for your intervention, Mr. Van Bynen. I would remind Mr. Zimmer that G46 has not been moved.
Yeah.
We are on debate on G4, so
okay.
Carry on.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. The Ruger #1 hunting firearm. Is that firearm going to be added to the prohibited list if legislation C21 passes with amendments?
The Ruger #1 already appears in Schedule 1, and it's been on that list since May of 2020. So there's nothing new
so it will
coming
be prohibited.
from C21.
Yeah.
It's just being repeated in the schedule as opposed to being in the regulations. However, I would also point out that it's only those versions of the Ruger #1 rifle which are chambered for a caliber which is capable of producing 10,000 joules of energy or more. It's listed in paragraph 95 of the existing regulations and of the proposed Schedule 1. So ordinary
with
calibers.
I have to keep moving. I know some of my colleagues want to ask questions today too, so I'm going to try and make the answers more concise. The fact of the matter is that the Ruger #1 is a hunting rifle, and it now will be prohibited as a result of
That would not be correct.
So let's go on to the next.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I was not.
Mr. Nur Mohammed on point of order.
If we can ask the witness to repeat his answer, because Mr. Zimmer was speaking over his answer, I couldn't hear what he had to say, and if we could just get clarity there, please.
Actually, it's my time, Mr. Chair.
It's the committee's time. If the committee is not hearing the answer, I would certainly invite the witness to state it again, and maybe a little more loudly.
The question, as I understood it to be, was about the Ruger #1 rifle and whether it was prohibited. And my answer is that some Ruger #1 rifles are prohibited, in particular those ones which are chambered for a caliber which is capable of producing 10,000 joules of energy or more. versions of the Ruger #1 rifle, which are chambered for ordinary hunting calibers of the type that someone would use in Canada for hunting deer or moose. The version of the Ruger #1 chambered for those calibers would not be prohibited. And in general, if it would be non-restricted.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Another
Next
point of order, Mr. Chair. Sorry, and this is since you're not to interrupt Mr. Zimmer. Is it me or
Mr. Mohammed on point of order.
sorry? Is it me or is it actually hard to hear? It is hard to hear, right? Okay. Okay. Is there any way we can turn? Excuse me. Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks. I thought it was I'm losing my hearing or something.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So let's go on to the next hunting rifle, the Mossberg 702 Plinkster 22 long rifle. Will that hunting and target shooting firearm, will it be prohibited as a result of C-21 legislation?
No, the Model 702 Plinkster is a conventional 22 caliber hunting rifle. It's unaffected by what's in C-21.
Okay. I'll go on to the next firearm. The hunting rifle, the Wesley Richards Model 1897. Is that firearm prohibited as a result of this legislation and associated amendments?
For that particular rifle, whether it's prohibited or not depends on the caliber it's chambered for. If that particular rifle is available in large African big game calibers, and some of which will exceed 10,000 joules, those versions of the rifle would be prohibited. Versions of it chambered for ordinary hunting calibers would not be prohibited. And I would further point out that this is no change from May of 2020.
And I just would acknowledge, and you would, sorry, I won't ask what you would say. I'll just say what I say. That is a hunting rifle, and it now will be prohibited as a result of the legislation. I'll go on to the next.
Only those versions which produce.
But it's still a hunting rifle that will be
energy.
prohibited.
Let's let the witnesses answer, please. I'm sorry, I missed your answer.
Mr. Chair, just let me clarify, because my understanding of committee is that the member has the ability to ask questions, and it's our time is very precious, and I'm trying to get through these as quickly as I can, even with the delays, because I know other colleagues would like to speak to this. My understanding is when I'm asking questions, that is the member's time. I'd maybe just clarify.
So all members are here to facilitate the study that the committee has undertaken. You're absolutely free to ask questions, providing they're on topic, but it's also required that we give due respect and consideration to the witnesses, and we should, if we ask them a question, we should hear their answers and not talk over them. So, Mr. Noor Mohammed on point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Can we also, as we're having these deliberations, and Mr. Zimmer is asking excellent questions, no question about that, can we also ensure that when the witness is giving an answer that people do not mischaracterize the answer that the witness has given in a statement and not give the witness a chance to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Noor Mohammed. So did the witness wish to clarify his last response at all?
I can repeat the answer. The Wesley Richards rifle is available in calibers which exceed 10,000 joules of energy. Those versions would be prohibited. Versions which are chambered for ordinary hunting calibers would not be prohibited, and in general would be non-restricted.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Let's go on to the next hunting firearm, the Winchester Model 54. Will that be prohibited as a result of the passing of C-21 and associated amendments?
The Model 50, Winchester Model 54 is not on any of the schedules. There is the potential for it to be impacted by the Evergreen Clause, however.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. The next hunting firearm, the Parker breech-loading shotgun. Is that going to be included in the prohibited list based on the passing of C-21 and associated amendments?
The Parker is a brand name, and they make a variety of shotguns, and as was the case with the other firearms you mentioned, some of them are available in large calibers which exceed 10,000 joules energy. Those versions would be prohibited. In the case of the Parker, which is a shotgun, it's more likely that the shotgun would be available in 8 gauge. And with a barrel of that size, it would exceed 20 millimeters and be prohibited for that reason. But Parker shotguns, which are chambered for ordinary hunting calibers like 10 gauge or 12 gauge or 20 gauge, et cetera, would be unaffected and would remain non-restricted.
Once again, though, another hunting firearm being included in the prohibition list. Another question, the Concari Farquharson 4 shotgun, will it be included as a result of the passing of C-21 and associated amendments?
It's the same situation where only those which are equipped with a barrel bigger than 10 gauge, so 8 gauge being the most common, which would exceed 20 millimeters and fall within the already existing paragraph 96 that's been there since 2020. So most of the shotguns would be unaffected, but the high energy or the large caliber ones would.
So once again, another hunting firearm being included.
It is a hunting firearm, but it's only prohibited in certain limited circumstances.
Yeah, still a hunting firearm, though. The Charles Daly XT3 Classic Black Ranger, will it be prohibited as a result of the passing of C-21 and associated amendments?
And I don't recall whether that firearm is on the existing list or not.
It would be captured by the paragraph in G4 that talks about center fire, magazine capacity, and
Okay. And what was the name of the firearm again, please?
the Charles Daly XT3 Classic Black Ranger. I could show you an image, but I'm not supposed to.
Yeah, no, I don't recall the specifics of that firearm.
Okay.
If you were to provide more information or allow me to
Okay.
look it up, I could
I
respond.
can do that following, happy to. Let's go to the next one, the NX-18, and it's a hunting rifle. I have an image of it right in front of me. It's actually a automatic or semi-automatic shotgun. It's a 410. Will it be? It's a hunting shotgun. Most of us have used 410s for grouse hunting, etc. Would the NX-18 semi-automatic 410 shotgun be included as a result of the passing of C-21 and associated amendments?
And again, I have to point out, I don't have every make and model memorized. I don't recall whether that shotgun has a detachable magazine or a fixed magazine. If it has a fixed magazine, it's unaffected. If it has a detachable magazine, it might be, but I'd need to look up the particulars for that particular shotgun.
But certainly has the capability, I think, and that's what's concerning many Canadians watching today. If it has the capability of having a detachable magazine, they will be included in paragraph G of G4.
Now, detachable magazines for shotguns is relatively uncommon even these days. So it's more likely that a shotgun that's designed for hunting would have a tubular fixed magazine and therefore would be unaffected.
The thing is, though, this is where the confusion is, and you're an expert. I know quite a bit about firearms, too. There's even confusion amongst us of whether it will be or not. And the capability, I think, is the key language. And if something's capable in the future of being deemed a certain way, this is, again, affecting firearms and hunters across this country. I'll keep going because I know time
Just a point of order. Again, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Van Bynen on a point of order, please.
There's so much speculation here that what we should be looking at also is that there's the potential that certain of these weapons could be restricted in the future. So to suggest that it's going to be captured is all premature, and to suggest that it's going to be included in the list, we haven't dealt with the list yet. So why don't we wait until we deal with the list? And I would suggest that we request to the member provide amendments if there are weapons that he feels that should not be included on the list, rather than just standing here and sitting here and speculating. I think our committee's time could be put to better use.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. I would remind Mr. Zimmer that this amendment has not yet been moved, that we are debating G4, not G46.
Actually, I'm just referring to G4 in
Okay.
this last firearm. And I guess just in answer to that, the question from the member, this is the onus is really on the government that's putting forward this legislation and the amendments included to really prove your case without a shadow of a doubt that certain firearms are not included on the list. And that's what I'm trying to do today. And I'm trying to give Canadians a good impression based on expert testimony at the end of the table, whether they will be or not. And you can see by the definition that, and it's speculative, but based on that definition, they certainly could be. And the capacity, that opens up a whole bunch of firearms that they're not on the G46, but they certainly will be included as a result of paragraph G and G4. So let me keep going.
Yeah, just a point of order, Mr.
Mr. Van Bynen,
Rather than speculate and suggest, why don't we have some suggestions and recommendations that would solve this, and this would be a far more productive use of our time.
Thank
so
you, Mr.
any
Van Bynen.
recommendations to make amendments would be appreciated.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. We'll let Mr. Zimmer carry on.
Well, I'll answer that question. The easy answer is repeal C-21. Pull the legislation. There it is. That solves everybody's problem here. So anyway, I'll move on. So the Remington 870 DM shotgun, it's a semi-automatic shotgun with a detachable clip that is at times used for hunting. Will this firearm be included in the prohibited list of C-21 and associated amendments?
So I would, once again, so when you're talking about a list, we haven't got a list, G4, and associated amendments is pretty broad. It's kind of hard for anybody to answer these questions this way. I really encourage you to drill into the definition. It would be very helpful, I think. And anyway, I certainly don't want to impede your inquiry, but I really would encourage you to focus on G4.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker or Mr. Chair, it is directly speaking to G4 in that particular paragraph. So anyway, can we have the answer from the firearms experts, please?
My recollection is that the Remington Model 870 shotgun is a pump-action shotgun.
I'm asking about
not
the semi-automatic variant of that particular firearm.
If such a thing exists, the definition would apply.
I could show you the image, but I know it's...
Yeah. The definition would apply to the shotgun if it were semi-automatic and centerfire and had a detachable magazine, which it appears to be the case, and that the capacity of that magazine exceeded 5 cartridges. So if the shotgun meets all of those criteria, then it would be prohibited if that particular amendment passes in its existing form. Those factors are all relatively easy for anyone to assess.
Mm-hmm. I guess the concern is with those, and I've had an 870 Marine Magnum. We used to go fishing back in the backcountry in BC, and I used to pack that just in case a grizzly bear came upon us as we were fishing. The concern is around this one. It's obvious that it is included based on the definition, but the concern for many firearms owners across Canada is the variant option. So based on that, it is the basis of the gun or the firearm is an 870, a well-known a firearm that's been in probably most farmers' gun vault over the last 100 years. The concern is that, okay, this one might be included, but what about all the variants? And that would put many of the shotguns under this prohibition.
Well, previously we were talking about the evergreening definition, and the variant or modified version clause is not applicable to that definition. The variant or modified version applies only to the schedules, and the Remington Model 870 does not appear on the schedules anywhere, so there are no variants which would be affected now or in the future.
So are you saying that the Remington 870 DM won't be prohibited?
Well, I'm not in a position to restrict what any future government would do. What I'm saying is that
based on G4 and that paragraph G.
G4 is the evergreening definition. The evergreening definition would apply to any future model if the
Current model.
manufacturer of the firearm were to make it in such a way that it met the criteria of that definition.
Okay, I'll keep going. So another firearm to ask you about. The Ruger PC carbine takedown hunting rifle, will it be included if legislation C-21 and proposed amendments passes? Yes or no?
First of all, I wouldn't characterize the PC carbine as a hunting rifle. The PC, my recollection is it stands for police carbine. It's a small semi-automatic carbine that has a standard magazine size, I believe, of just under 20 cartridges, 17 perhaps. I'd have to look up to be sure. But as such, it would meet the evergreening definition in that it is semi-automatic. It fires a center fire cartridge. It has a detachable magazine, and the capacity of that magazine exceeds 5 shots. So that firearm would be captured by that definition if it were to come into force.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Let's go on to the HOA 1500 Hogue bolt-action rifle, hunting rifle. Will that particular firearm, if C-21 passes with associated amendments, will it be prohibited?
It could be prohibited if it's in a caliber large enough to exceed 10,000 joules, but I think the likelihood of it for that particular firearm is limited, so probably not, but it could be, but only in the offending
It is on the
calibers.
current, it is on the G46. I know we're talking about G4 and G46 is out there, but
Yeah,
it's on there.
And to the extent that it's on, it would only be where it's chambered for the high-energy cartridges. I believe you'd find it, if it's listed, it would be in paragraph 95,
Okay.
which is, that's been there since May of 2020. There's no change in what's before the committee today.
Okay, how about the Weatherby Mark 1, 2, or 5 hunting rifle, a very common hunting rifle in Canada? We spoke with Weatherby yesterday. There's been 1,000 that have just been ordered by hunters this year and distributed amongst retailers. Will those be prohibited if C-21 legislation and associated amendments pass?
The Weatherby Mark 5 is available in a high-energy caliber, known as 460 Weatherby Magnum. So Weatherby rifles chambered for that caliber would be prohibited because the energy exceeds 10,000 joules. However, Weatherby offers the firearms in a wide variety of calibers, most of which are below the 10,000 joule threshold, and those would have the same classification as they do today, which is typically non-restricted.
And I guess I'll bring this up once again, is the concern out in the firearms community and the hunting community and hunters across Canada is that will it be somehow associated based on that it's a variant of the particular caliber that you mentioned, and by being a variant, will it be included? And I guess that isn't clear, and that's why we're getting so many questions about it.
Yes, well, the prohibited versions of the Weatherby Mark V would be that way because they're chambered for a high energy caliber, and paragraph 95 applies, and paragraph 95 does not follow the same conventions as the other paragraphs in the regulations. There is no variant or modified version clause in that paragraph, so there is no question of any future variants whatsoever.
So I guess back to the original question, that is the Mark 1, 2, or 5 hunting rifle on the prohibited list, and you've answered yes.
Yes, the Weatherby rifles would be prohibited only if they happen to be chambered for a caliber that exceeds 10,000 joules of energy.
Okay, another question on a competition rifle. The FNAR Competition 308 rifle. It's a semi-automatic. It's chambered in centerfire calibers. Will this particular firearm be included in the prohibition list if C-21 and associated amendments pass?
Well, that particular rifle is already prohibited. It's been prohibited since circa 1992 or 1995 in the original regulations, which you would find in Schedule 1. So there's no change there. The FNFL family is all prohibited.
Well, I guess it's interesting because that particular firearm is available for sale today. And I've seen it, and I'll show you. Again, I'd like to hold up a picture, but I
Are you sure it's an
can't.
FNFL, sir?
FNAR.
Or maybe I didn't hear it correctly.
Yeah,
So
FNAR.
an FNAR. Okay, that's a different gun. That's not an FNFL. So
Yeah, no, it's an FNAR.
Yeah, so that's a firearm that is a blend of the FNFL and AK-47. It's not explicitly on any of the older lists, the Schedule 1. I would have to check to see if it's on Schedule 2. Just
Yeah,
excuse me one
well,
moment.
and just to clarify too, Mr. Smith, this is in reference to paragraph G in G4 and falls under that definition by just observation.
Oh, yes, it would fall within the bounds of that particular definition because it is a rifle. It is semi-automatic. It fires a centerfire cartridge, and it has a detachable magazine, and the magazine size is vary up to about 30 shots. So yes, it would be captured.
Okay. I've asked quite a few questions about firearms, and my colleagues will likely have more to ask. And again, it's all to do with C-21 in the legislation, but it's going to take a little bit there's a different question. And if you can't answer that, I respect that. My question is, and I think Canadians are wondering too, because I think Canadians want to be safer. And I think with this legislation, the Prime Minister has led people to believe that it will make them safer. But in capturing hunters and their hunting rifles, we know that hunters are not the problem when it comes to crime in Canada. We all know that in this room. I'm going to be bringing up an article that speaks to that. But maybe I'll ask you your opinion. Are hunting rifles the problem when it comes to public safety in Canada?
Well, that's a policy issue that is best answered by public safety. I'm here to answer technical questions.
Okay. Well, let me just refer to an article in National Post from September 6th. And this is, again, kind of answers the question I've just asked. What is the problem? Most of the crime guns seized in Toronto are smuggled into Canada from U.S. It says, police is the response. And so the quote is, and it's relevant because this is what was a statement that was made before Public Safety Committee. Most laws, and this is from police chiefs directly. Most laws we create are not going to be followed by people committing crimes with guns, said Regina Police Chief Evan Bray. We have a ban on murder in Canada, and yet sadly, we still have homicides. Toronto Deputy Chief Marianne Demkew testified 86%, and remember that number, 86% of the crime guns were smuggled into Canada.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, point of order.
Mr. Van Bynen, on a point of order, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I thought we invited these experts in for technical advice. If we want to have some political commentary, we could do that another time. Our time is better spent asking the experts on firearms the technical questions that they were invited here for.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. Mr. Zimmer may be just debating. I hope that if that would not be a question you could really address to these witnesses, but you can certainly bring these matters up as a matter of debate.
Yeah, I'll continue on. So the Toronto Deputy Chief Marianne Demkew testified 86% of crime guns were smuggled into Canada. Blandford said, facing the nearly insurmountable task of securing Canada's porous borders and coastlines, it's not surprising Ottawa went after low-hanging fruit of punishing gun owners. And that's why I'm bringing it up today, because that's what we're talking about. Legal gun owners go through a rigorous process to be vetted to own a firearm, he said. Legitimate gun owners, whether they're handgun or long rifle, are probably amongst the most law-abiding citizens in the country. They are not the problem. And the reason I bring that up today, this is why we're here today, was talking about C-21, a bill that's supposed to make us more safe, by tackling the wrong element. It's going after law-abiding firearms owners and their firearms, their hunting firearms. But let me go on to talk about what the problem is. And it's very relevant to this conversation because, again, the C-21 is meant to address this very question. So what is the problem? Illegal guns, as I've just laid out, coming across the border are the problem. 86%, according to the Toronto Deputy Chief Myron Demkew. 86% of those firearms used that are killing our kids on the streets of Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal are coming from across the border. Okay? So then what can we do about it? I'm just going to talk about how many firearms were seized at the border. The number of firearms, this is another article from CTV, July 2022, and it speaks to these guns as they're coming across. The number of firearms Canada seized at the border more than doubled last year from 1,110 to 1,110 from 495 in 2020. The highest total since at least 2016, according to the numbers provided to Reuters at the Canada's Border Service Agency. And these are the only ones that they've seized. How many guns pour across our border and end up into criminals' hands and that are, again, killing our kids? It goes on. Gun violence in Toronto, Canada's most populous city, reached a 15-year high in 2019 with 492 incidents involving firearms, according to police data. That number fell following 2 years, but 2022 is on track to rise once again. So that's the problem. And yet this government brings in C-21 and brings in even a further amendment to even punish law-abiding firearms owners even more. But I'd like to, so the cost of what this is, what C-21 is going to cost Canadians. I think it's going to be relevant in my final point. Because we know that even the previous long gun registry that once again targeted law-abiding firearms owners was promised it was going to cost $2 million, ended up costing $2 billion. So what is the estimate? Well, I'll read an article from an expert. He's a Simon Fraser professor. Trudeau government buyback firearms plan may cost up to $6.7 billion. And that's prior to this latest G46 amendment being laid on this committee's table. So I'll quote.
Just as point of reference, the G47 has not yet been laid on this committee's table. And this is good commentary, but it really doesn't pertain to G4.
It's relevant to C-21 though, Mr. Chair. It's completely relevant. And so the $6.7 billion, it says this range.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Nur Mohammed on point of order.
Is it not, should we not, are the questions not to be germane to the specific clause up for discussion?
The debate is supposed to be on G4, and it's very, Mr. Zimmer can bring it back at some point and
Absolutely.
Render that satisfied. But I'm just encouraging him to do so.
Yeah, it absolutely is, because when G4 and C-21 will be implemented, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's what the cost is going to cost to Canadians. And I'm going to get to not just the cost, because I think people would say we're willing to pay a price as long as it makes it safe. But what I'm arguing, this isn't making us more safe. So the range estimate rises between $2.6 billion and $6.7 billion after you include compensation costs to owners. And again, this same author has said with the addition of this potential new amendment being added, it adds another $1 billion. So easily between, and Ms. Dancho knows this too well, between 5 and 10 billion, pretty easy by the time it's all said and done. So for those mums of kids in our inner cities, and I'm a father of 4, you know, I want to see our streets more safe. We know that violent crime has increased by 33% under this Prime Minister and government. We know that gang crime has increased by 92% since this government took office. So what they're doing isn't working. And this is another bill put forward that's got the image or sort of the facade that it will do something when it really won't. So we know that the cost is going to be between $5 and $10 billion. So what could $5 to $10 billion do in a positive way, instead of going after law-abiding firearms owners and hunters in Canada? Well, simple math, even if, let's pick the lower amount, let's pick $5 billion as the amount that we're going to calculate this on. If we added, based on an average salary and training for the average police officer, CBSA agent, at $150,000, we could put 10,000 officers on the streets for about 4 years. And so just imagine those containers that we hear there's one in every 100 that actually gets inspected at the border where we know the problem is. Imagine putting another 5,000 CBSA agents at the borders to capture these guns before they get across to gang members in our inner cities. Just imagine. Or as my colleague, Mr. Calkins, has even informed me, is that the equipment that we could give those border agents to completely scan every container. We could easily pay for the manpower and the equipment to up our game at the borders dramatically to reduce the guns coming across. So why aren't we doing that? Something that will have a real impact. And I guess in a positive way too. Ultimately, this ends up on the streets as seeing firearms that are and crime that's hurting our kids. We see the crime rates are spiking and getting worse. And by the list that I've read out earlier today, it's not comprehensive, even Mr. Smith, as you acknowledge. Paragraph G really opens it up to a whole bunch of other hunting firearms potentially. And all for almost zero effect when we know that 86% of those firearms that are killing our kids are coming across the border. They're not coming from law-abiding hunters in my community, that's for sure. So my final point is we know that hunters are not the problem. We know what the problem is. And knowing what the problem is, how about we put that huge amount of money in a place that it'll actually work and keep our communities safe? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. We go now to Mr. Calkins. Mr. Calkins represents my hometown, by the way, so welcome.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Mr. Chair.
I said you have the floor, but I just mentioned that you represent my hometown. So.
Yes, I do. We've had that conversation before. So thank you, Chair. And so I'm just going to make some introductory remarks as the Shadow Minister for Hunting, Fishing, and Conservation and His Majesty's loyal opposition. And then I'll get to some of the questions that I have for our esteemed witnesses. You know, Canada, once a refuge for the rugged individual, we would be hard-pressed to make a case for that for Canada today. Since 1850, urbanization has swept the country, practically inverting the population of urban dwellers and rural residents. Today, nearly 80% of Canadians live in an urban area. As noted by one of the members opposite, Canada has changed. Although he is not entirely wrong in his assessment, in this process of change, many aspects of this country have been improved. However, blind nostalgia does us no favors. Yet as different as the country looks today compared to the one the traveler would have found in 1850, this does not mean that all traces of this old Canada ought to be erased. For those Canadians and First Nations who live in remote areas or participate in the outdoor way of life, their lived reality is a different one than those who keep the most populated or live in the most populated parts of our nation. As you can imagine, life in places like Pond Inlet in Nunavut, Ignace, Ontario, Sept-Îles, Quebec, Corner Brook, Newfoundland, or Prince Rupert, British Columbia, resemble nothing of the urban experience in downtown Vancouver, Toronto, or Montreal. One should note that the prevalence of firearms licenses per 100 people is the highest in Yukon, for a rate of 19.17%. 1 in 5 Yukoners has a firearm, compared to the national average of just under 6%, thus indicating a wide swing in licenseship ownership in certain parts of the country. It may come as a surprise to the members opposite, but those participating in the hunting lifestyle are surprisingly diverse. The hunters of today are not your trappers of the early fur trade, which, by the way, is an essential part of our history and the basis of modern commerce in our nation. Hunting is a genuine family-oriented activity enjoyed by those of all creeds and ethnic backgrounds, where the wisdom of past generations is passed down to the new. I am here at committee today because with Bill C-21, the federal government has, whether it wants to admit it or not, basically said to hunters that your way of life is going to be no more. Guns are not weapons of war, as some politicians would like to have you believe, but an essential harvesting tool used for hunters to feed their families. It provides food security in our northern and remote communities, and I've heard scoffing and other rhetoric from other politicians indicating that this way of life is not even needed in a modern Canada. And I take particular offense in the carelessness and what appears to be the carelessness of the drafting of not only this bill, but of the proposed amendments that are before it. It is clear to me that Bill 71 is not based on science at all. It is not based on any evidence at all, but it is a simple political decision, and the problem with this is it tarnishes the time-honored traditions of firearms owners and sport shooters in this country, hunters included. It tarnishes the reputations, sullies the reputations of these good, honest, law-abiding, patriotic Canadians. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a proponent of naturalism, once stated that the only true freedom was found in nature alone, and that one must remain close to nature and its inherent liberty and equality. It is Rousseau that created the concept of the social contract, to counter the loss of freedom brought on by man's move away from the inherent freedom of nature. He believed that a man's participation in what he called unnatural collective activities infringed on his liberty, and as such, a bargain called the social contract had to be struck. The purpose of this social contract, made by sacrificing some individual freedom for state protection and cooperative benefits, lays out the obligations of government towards its subjects. Although we can argue about what these consist of, John Locke, another contributor to the theory of social contracts, explained it best when he said, "Being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions." Bill C-21 is a piece of legislation that breaks this social contract. Beyond the obvious point of liberty, it also infringes on both the right to possess guns themselves and a right to personal health and freedom. This may all seem academic, but fear not. I'm about to present some real-world concrete examples of what the infringement on the Canadian social contract means for the hunting community. Canadians have a reasonable right to own their possessions. One of the foundational pillars of the social contract, private property lies at the heart of many democratic systems. We know this to be true, as even though it is not enshrined in our legislation, that Canada is a signatory to the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which recognizes that everyone has the right to own property, and provides that no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his or her property. Arbitrary is an important word in this context, as Bill C-21 does exactly this. Not only is the classification of firearms in Amendment G4 and G46E arbitrary, but the lack of buyback or any provisions hinting at a buyback is proof of how little the government regards the concept of property rights. It is also striking to me that many of these guns included on the list of firearms are not solely semi-automatic as intended by the legislation and as advertised by the Prime Minister, but many are bolt-action rifles and shotguns, including the likes of the Winchester Model 54, Weatherby Mark V, the Kimber 89 African, and the Montana Rifle 1999. These are not military rifles that later became popular as hunting arms, but were designed explicitly for the purpose of hunting. A separate point I would like to make is the availability of both firearms and ammunition in northern communities. Access to firearms in northern communities is already limited and can be hard to come by in the make and model desired by hunters. Notwithstanding COVID supply chain issues, there has been a long-running difficulty in supplying the North with these items. In fact, Canada Post will no longer ship ammunition, and now with this ban replacing with this proposed ban, if it comes into force, replacing these banned firearms will be difficult for First Nations and Inuit in an already stretched market. By instituting such a wide-ranging ban, the Liberal government will make it difficult for these hunters to replace their firearms. Yet these people are the likeliest to perform sustenance hunting, endangering a critical method of ensuring food security in a harsh environment where groceries come at an irregular pace and with high prices. Lastly, I would like to focus on how our new gun laws will affect the tourism sector. Hunters inbound from abroad, especially the United States, contribute significantly to our hunting sector and keep our lodges and outfitters busy. And I might add that for the last 2 years of COVID-19, guides and outfitters and lodges have been some of the most hardest hit in the tourism sector. And I can tell you, as a hunter, that these tourists often prefer to take their own firearms, as not only will they be more ergonomic, but also have the added safety benefit of the hunter knowing his own firearm. By depriving foreign tourists of their reasonable hunting rifles, as proposed, will happen, I can assure you it will happen with the evergreening clause, as it's referred to, and with the schedule list of firearms. This will result in just yet another blow to the guides and outfitters and lodges across our country. As for the health component of the social contract, it is clearly violated by Bill C-21. Those closest to the natural world, for example, our rural Canadians and hunters, are the most impacted by the loss of liberty engendered by an increasingly urbanized society. They are also the ones most vulnerable to the loss of their physical well-being due to the prohibition of their tools and property. As previously mentioned, this bill may in fact affect food security if there is also a physical health component to firearms debate that is not often discussed, that of workers in remote areas. In some parts of our country and in some industries, firearms are vital to one's physical safety. In this scenario, firearms are actually used for self-defense. Tour operators operating in the north need to ensure that their guests are protected from polar bears and other wildlife. They have a duty of care to protect their guests. When beekeepers go out into remote areas to collect honey from their hives, it is not uncommon at all for a beekeeper to be caught unaware by a lingering bear. This is a completely different scenario than a hunter who is walking through the woods carrying his or her firearm, ready at a moment's notice to pursue the hunt. These are people who find themselves in a defensive position. These are people who need to be able to react and respond quickly because their primary focus and objective while they're working is not the same as the primary focus of somebody who is hunting. And I can tell you, without any hesitation whatsoever, that the ability to have a shotgun that would be caught up in the evergreening clause or on the schedule that is proposed in these amendments to Bill C-21 would take a vast number of firearms away from people who are just trying to defend themselves. I know beekeepers who carry with them a Tavor because it is compact, it has 5 rounds, it's chambered in .308, and it will stop a bear. And now this beekeeper is going to have his property rendered valueless, and he has to go and search for another firearm or shotgun that would have the similar capabilities of the Tavor, not knowing if Section G4 of this proposed legislation, of the amendment coming through, would in fact eventually get that new firearm caught up in the prohibited list. This violates the social contract between Canadians and their government, and it also potentially harms the health and safety and well-being of Canadians. I remember very vividly, because I have worked most of my life prior to coming to Parliament in the outdoor industry. I was a conservation officer for the province of Alberta, and I was a national park warden in Jasper National Park. I'm also a hunter. There are numerous reasons why people would have a semi-automatic firearm. Anybody working in the forestry industry, anybody who's done the job of timber cruising, where you're going down a cut line, determining whether or not a cut block is going to be productive or not for your forestry company, would carry with them a shotgun likely advertised by the manufacturer as a defender. It could be semi-automatic, it could be pump action, it would likely have a pistol grip, and it would likely be polymer plastic, or made out of polymer, and it would be black. And it would look to the untrained eye like a scary gun. But it is the firearm that would be best used and best positioned to provide the safety benefit to somebody's son or daughter, to somebody's brother or sister, to somebody's mom or dad who's working in the outdoor environment in a situation where they can be put at risk. Not to mention all of the hunters in this land, not everybody who hunts with a firearm. There are bow hunters. And if you don't have the knowledge or experience of what it's like to sit in a tree stand and call or bugle for an elk or for a buck or for a bull moose, what you are also doing in that act is letting every predator in the woods know that you are there as well.